States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Vice President, except for you, Shane, and that's it, right?
Mr. Mayor, I move to excuse council members Brickner and Severs.
A second.
Second, further discussion, not hearing, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No. And I think we just have one thing on the agenda tonight, right?
That is correct.
Want to have citizen comments, or
It's up to
any
the
citizen
pleasure of the
comments
council.
here? Otherwise, we'll save it for after the presentation.
Mr. Mayor, move the agenda as printed.
Oh, move the agenda.
Second.
Second, further discussion, not hearing, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Now the citizen comments, not hearing any, we're going to go forward. Jocelyn.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here for our Community Needs Assessment and Library Master Planning Project. We are really looking forward to getting your input and feedback as we talk about the community and library service, both currently as looking at what we're needing and then maybe into the future as our community grows. Thank you to all citizens who came as well. I would like to introduce you to our consultants, Rob and Kim. They are with Kimberly Bolin and Associates, and Rob will be leading us through the questions tonight to try and get some good conversation happening. They have a lot of years of experience in libraries and some very interesting rules of thumb and things like that that they can share as well. So I will go ahead and take it over. And I'll take some notes, and they're going to take notes as well.
We're not videotaping this evening.
That is correct.
Make sure everybody's using their mics then.
Thank you, Jocelyn. As you said, my name is Rob Cullen with Kimberly Bolin Associates. My associate here, Kimberly Bolin, and I, as you said, we're library consultants. We're based in Indiana, but we work with libraries, almost exclusively publics across the country. In fact, I've done quite a few, several projects in this region as well. We did a big project for the Community Library Network in Hayden and Post Falls, Lathrop County down in Iowa, and we're really excited to be working here with Liberty Lake. So what we're doing tonight is basically what we've been doing in 8 of the other sessions that we have been doing with public and staff, library board, council, and we're just kind of trying to get as much kind of community input into this needs assessment as possible, right? Our real mission as consultants is really focused on getting the libraries aligned to what their communities really want. There's no formula for libraries. There's no like, this is exactly how a library should be. There's certainly guidelines and some standards to a certain extent, but there's really no exact formula. So we really think we like to focus on trying to figure out, what a community really wants from that, and that's what this process is about. So from our standpoint and consultants, Kim's going to be, like she said, taking notes. Kim's a librarian. She's got over 30 years of experience in libraries now, and this will actually be one of her last full-time projects as she's going back into public service at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So this is exciting as she's starting her next chapter. 15 years of full-time consulting, and I get to move forward doing this that I was helping her on the side, and now I've been doing full-time for the last 6 years. Okay, so what we've been doing in the start of the conversation with the community is, again, this is a community needs assessment, so before we get into the library, we want to really understand what people like, what they love, and how they really see the community of Liberty Lake. So I pose that question to you. What is it that you think makes Liberty Lake special? What do you think is important about this community and to the people that live here?
Dan.
A family-oriented community.
Yep.
Opportunities for the community to get involved.
Yeah.
I think our community has a great deal of homeschooling
Yep.
opportunities.
Yeah, we've heard that a little bit, so we're going to try and dig into some of what might going on. It's a hard community sometimes to kind of delve into, like how many people are really doing that, but that's a research area we've identified already in the project to kind of look into.
A great footprint in outdoor recreation.
Okay. a lot of trails and things, I know, that, you know.
I think also that, I think we're viewed as a fairly young community.
Yeah.
Young in age, I believe, a couple of years ago I saw statistics, I think the average age was like 39 years of age. So we have a lot of families in the area.
Yeah, we would want, part of this process, and so obviously we're doing a lot more than community input, but we're doing a really thorough kind of demographic and psychographic analysis of the community. We've done a little bit of that preliminary demographic already. 30% of the community is under 18, which is significantly higher than Spokane County and the state of Washington. So definitely a younger community than average.
Right.
What do you think some of the challenges are? Some of the challenges the community's been facing?
In relation to the library,
I think more in general, before we get, and we're gonna talk about it in the library, but I mean, like, what are some of the things, I mean, this community's growing fast, right? I mean, almost 50% growth since the last census, probably will be by the time that the 2020 census, you know, kicks in. With growth is a great thing, but it also brings challenges. So what do you think what are some of the challenges that you think the community's seeing?
Well, there's growth in a north-south type growth,
Mhm.
right? And so you need to create the connectivity, but also the connectivity to the service.
Yep.
And so if the library's on one side, how do you make that connectivity to the other side to some extent?
Yeah, because that interstate kind of creates a little bit of
Like a river.
river, creates a little bit of barrier.
And the other thing that I think somewhat is, you've identified age, so you have 30% under 18.
Mhm.
You probably got 30% over 65 or 60 or somewhere around there. So you have kind of like these two-dimensional things, and you have,
Yeah, and that's the thing I was surprised that actually the over 65 population is actually under the state and county averages. I don't remember, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but they were actually a little lower. I think possibly just because of that huge shift on the younger side. But it wasn't as, I would have thought that too, that it was kind of on the both ends, but it was a little bit less even in that area. So that's certainly, there are people here in that, you know, it's still a good size of part of the community, but not the big bulk that I would have expected potentially.
I think one of the challenges could be is how the citizens view the city compared to other cities. So a lot of other cities are a lot older.
Yeah.
So they've had their established downtown area.
Yeah.
A lot of cities have had where they had the initial growth and then a decline, and now it's starting to build back up.
Right.
Whereas Liberty Lake, everything is on the growth.
Yeah.
We don't have an old downtown.
Right.
Our oldest neighborhoods are 30 years old or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
So I think people perceive is that this growth is out of control. And sometimes we're not realizing that, because we're a planned community, that individuals, before this was a city,
Right.
took that thing into consideration. And I think that the staff that we have in council has tried to ride that wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
on
One of the things I don't know I don't think it's really a challenge, but I think it's one of it's kind of interesting because we work with so many communities all across the country. We couldn't really think of another community we work with where almost everybody that lives here is not from here, right? Almost everybody that is here has moved here, which I think is a direct contrast to a client in Indiana we were at last week where 98% of the people in that community were born there,
Right.
and like 80% of their parents were born there, and grandparents. So a very different contrast to here. I don't know if that's a challenge. I think it provides some interest and some dynamics maybe, but.
I think it's important to realize that, because I know
Yeah.
for several of the council members that are regular attendees of the farmer's market, we get individuals that come through, and it's really rare that we have somebody who says, I was raised here,
Mhm.
or I lived over here where there was no field.
Right.
Very few people we get of that. Most of it is, we moved to the area, we like it, that type of stuff.
I think one of our biggest challenges is communication and education to the public.
Yeah.
Years ago, the Splash was a weekly publication, now it's down to monthly.
Mhm.
And I know for me, because it doesn't come as regularly, I don't read it as thoroughly as I used to. I think we're doing a better job, but really getting out to the public and helping them understand what's going on. I've talked to a lot of people at the farmer's market who had no idea about our big highway project, even though
Right.
it's been out there for a long time and it was announced months ago. So that education, and educating the public is very
Yeah.
difficult.
Communication, and we have a slide talking about that a little later to ask specific questions, but it's definitely become a huge issue for every town, every community across across the country as channels of communication become really fragmented.
I think to spin off of that, I think you're making a really good point, Chris, that we seem to just struggle to get the information out to the public. And I think we have the public who will say, well, the city needs to be more informative and stuff. But I also think that citizens, we are such bombarded with information.
Yeah.
On the cell phone, on just everything that is out there.
Right.
So when we try to get information on the city, I think it falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that is high on their list.
agenda, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Kind of in a more global aspect,
Yeah,
what's the definition of the modern library? I guess that's one of the, I think that's a confounding thing
sure.
for people.
And I would kind of harken back to something I said at the beginning, is there's no real formula, right? I mean, I don't know that there's ever really been like a formula for a library. I think we feel like there's been this like 1950s formula for a library of how it was, and maybe there was more consistency back then there is now, but I think it's always been probably a little more different than we thought. You may be surprised. I mean, you know, a lot of people like and a lot of people dislike, very kind of polarizing on the whole social component of the library, right? I mean, many of us probably in this room grew up in a much more academically quiet focused library where the librarians shushed you and things like that, right? But many libraries didn't start out that way. I mean, some of the early Carnegie libraries in Pennsylvania were built with social dance clubs, swimming pools. They were, you know, that early vision that Carnegie and some of the other early library leaders had this vision of the library as a civic center, right? Not just a quiet place where you got to books and, well, at that time it was just books, right? So I think that, you know, there's some romantic notions maybe that we have that aren't maybe as true as we think they are, and that have evolved over time. I think the thing that we see that's always been a consistent thread through libraries all since they're really, you know, mid-1800s kind of burst onto the scene in terms of this idea of a public library for the community, is this idea of making expensive resources available on a shared basis through the shared, you know, resources of the community available. Like this idea of a kind of shared economy. You hear a lot, you know, in the 21st century, you know, entrepreneurship about the shared economy, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the delivery services and things like this. This idea of a shared economy, Zip cars, and I don't know if Spokane has them yet, but all over the east and the west coast, I know the scooters in the cities and things like that. And if you think about it, libraries were really they were the early settlers of the shared economy, right? That's what they were doing. And if you look at all the things that have come in the last, particularly the last 30 to 40 years, that's the thread that ties it together. Computers, right? Computers came into the libraries in the 80s. There was no internet. There weren't databases. We didn't have electronic catalogs, but they were expensive and people wanted to use them and have access to them. The library stepped in and provided those. Now, you couldn't imagine a library without a computer, right? But in the 80s, there was no real fundamental reason other than that shared kind of access. Meeting rooms and study rooms, things like that, are about that shared access, right? So the collections feel like that one consistency, but it's because in the 1800s, books were really expensive, right? A single manuscript in the 1800s cost what an iPad costs today. So farmers weren't going to be, you know, buying a bunch of those to put on their shelves, so the community pooled their resources to share those. And I think that's the consistency, and if there's a overlying vision of where libraries are today and into the future, it's what are the things that our community needs, that everybody has, you know, some level of needs for, different levels obviously depending on your household, but what is that, those things, those resources, those services that everybody needs that are easy to share, easy to, you know, kind of lend and work with together. And that's, I think, and that's going to vary by community, right? Because those needs, what, you know, are going to vary by community. So let's turn specifically to the library now. So I'm curious, what's like the first thing that kind of comes to your mind when you think about the library here in Liberty Lake? Like, what's the thing that pops to your mind first and foremost?
Gathering place.
Okay.
Place for kids.
A place for quiet study and review.
Yeah. do you think, what do you think the community's perception of the library is today?
Great kids programs.
Yeah,
Great kids and active programs.
yeah. It
It-
depends,
yeah, it
obviously.
obviously depends.
Sure.
But, yeah, we hear from a lot, we've heard over the years from a lot of people,
Yeah.
you know, why do we need a bit more library space? You know, there's hardly ever anybody in the parking lot, is what we hear. Depends on what time of day you go by.
Sure, right. Yep,
And for me, it's been a great resource for, in the past, when I've been, you know, job hunting and things like that, it's been a great resource.
And I think the opinions, of course, vary with the age bracket.
sure.
You know, somebody who has kids probably has one opinion, somebody whose kids are into college or beyond, not, and maybe a senior citizen, might change their attitude as they have grandchildren, and they reconnect with the library, with the kids.
One of the things that we've seen that's interesting over our work with communities all over the country is, you know, your personal need for the library isn't always completely hooked in with how you perceive the library, right? There's been a lot of studies that show like usage of the library. You kind of would think that, well, your usage aligns with how valuable you think it is. But often, like, the usage rate of libraries is much lower than the really see this as valuable to our community, you know, kind of element. So it is, you know, I think it does vary a little. One of the things I think that's complicating things these days that wasn't an issue before is some misperception about what's happening with books, right? I think I'm always interested to see if, you know, in sometimes groups like this, it's like, well, you know, not sure if we need it because everything's available on the internet now. And people are all reading on digital devices and kids don't care about books, right? Well, you know, I think 10 years ago, I was worried about the same thing. I'm in the library industry. At the time, I had a software company, and we're like, man, we hooked our wagon to this industry that might completely go away in 15, 20, 30 years. But like a lot of things that take off very fast, digital reading has leveled off, right? And this notion that the kids that grew up with devices in their hands from birth were going to want to read everything on devices is actually turning out to be the opposite. Gen Z, you know, the kids that are kind of teens, and, you know, or preteens, teens, and now into college, that generation for academic pursuits has an 80% preference for physical books, and for pleasure reading, 75%. That's across multiple different studies. USA Today actually printed this on their front page about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So this generational preference for digital format hasn't emerged, and in fact, they have the strongest preference for physical books out of all the generations in play right now. The people digital reading are many of us in this room, people over 45, are doing the most digital reading. So, and I think, so that perception is there, and I think, and it's a bit of a challenge but things have changed, right? That the internet does provide a lot of what we might have gone to the library for in the 80s and 90s. But, you know, the programming piece, the lifelong learning, those things have emerged. Meeting space, I mean, I don't know where everybody met in the 80s, right? But I go into some communities that have a lot, like, you know, there are 3 or 4 big meeting rooms and study rooms and group studies, and it's like, where did all these people meet before they built this library? So, that, those needs are ever increasing, it seems like, in most communities. Yeah.
Just like the communication piece that I mentioned earlier, I think there's a lack of understanding on the public's part as to how many resources the library does have.
Yeah.
We had somebody comment this weekend at the farmer's market, oh, you guys really need to join Spokane County Library System because there's so many more things, you know, that are available. And it's one of those conversations you nod and thank them for
Sure.
their input.
Right.
But I wish that was the day Jocelyn was there to really let him explain what all that our library really does offer, the databases, the book transfers, and
Right.
on and on.
You're part of a strong system already, right? So, yeah.
I know there's a lot of people that I visit with on the farmer's market and stuff, when we do discuss library, there's a tone that always seems to come out, is that almost a pride in ownership, that we have a library. It is Liberty Lake Library.
Yep.
It's not county library, it's not Spokane Library, it's Liberty Lake Library.
Yep.
And I think when they say that, in their mind, they're claiming ownership
Yeah.
to that. This is mine.
Yep.
I'm paying for this, this is mine.
Yep.
And I think that's strong in people's minds.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and we've worked with some communities that have struggled with whether they stay independent or join systems and things, and it's not an easy decision, to make, and I do think that when you see that strong sense of ownership in a lot of communities, and those are the ones that tend to say, let's we want to keep the control, and we want to keep this to be ours and to focus on our needs as a community. Because when you join a system inherently, the broader needs come more into play, right? Just quickly, I don't know, when we're talking to the community, we spend probably a lot of time on this subject. I think because we want to kind of keep this to an hour, there's a couple topics I want to hit shorter, but customer service is obviously important in any kind of organization, very much so in libraries. Any strong opinions from the council in terms of customer service at the Liberty Lake Library?
Well, I think we need to continually invest in people that bring extra value. It's not just, I'm gonna help you check out the book.
Right.
For instance, right now we're doing digital printing over there.
Mhm.
Well, if you don't know how to run a digital printer,
Right.
you need that.
Right.
Right. So we need some of those skill sets that maybe we didn't look at a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of our major investments we have to continually focus on and make for the library.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, when we did a needs assessment of the community concerning the library and community center and some other things, I was concerned about level of service standards. And did a little research and found out that some states have level of service standards. I specifically found one for Colorado.
Yeah.
And I sent that to our state legislators and asked them to consider that, enacting that for Washington, but no one ever presented it to the legislature.
Yeah.
But how do we determine the level of service if there are no standards or no guidelines for that?
Well, I think as a community that has control over that, you can look, yes, maybe it would be easier politically if the state was setting some standards and that kind of held, you to, right? So, but nothing stops you from saying, as a community, we want to adopt similar standards to Colorado or Wisconsin. We live in Indiana. Indiana has service standards that vary by library size,
Yes.
right? So that, so it doesn't expect a community of 11,000 like Liberty Lake to deliver on the same, service standards as a community of 60,000,
Right.
right? So I don't think it's beyond anything to say, well, we want some service standards for our library and to find some models in the country that might make sense here and say we want to strive for this service level in our community, even though it's not mandated at the state level.
Well, I think that's a good point, because we have levels of service standards that are really established for our police officers, as an example.
Right.
And I think there are probably some guidelines from the state, but we adopted those individually and internally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's a good point.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this, some of the misconceptions around collections. That everything's going digital. Yes, there's lots of digital. The library has a strong digital collection, particularly as a part of the system that they belong to. Any specific thoughts on the collections of the library?
I love the Overdrive. I'm one who listens a lot. I don't
Yeah.
do the e-readers, but I listen to a lot of books now. I'm a regular user.
Part of our pack, or the services that we're doing is a collection analysis. So we look at all of the different sections and subgenres of the library's collection. We look at turnover, which is how often does the average book in that particular collection go out on an annual basis, comparing that versus kind of standards that we see typical for this size library. So we're doing that. We look at what is this portion of your collection as a percentage of your overall circulation versus a percentage of your overall collection. And that kind of balance, you can look and see maybe we're a little imbalanced in these areas, or we have more books in this collection, so then we're really circulating, so maybe we need to look a little closer in that area with a little more in-depth in terms of weeding to make sure that that collection is what the community really needs. Because if it's not circulating, then what's that tell you? If that book's never going out, then maybe there isn't a need for that book. But that's where professional staff can evaluate, how do you make some judgments
Turn
about
over
whether
a
that.
bigger collection.
What's that?
Give it to a bigger collection. Now they have it, we can go borrow it. If we need it.
Well, I love the program that was put in place. Was it just earlier this year or last year where we lease the bestsellers and then, so we don't have to keep them in the collection forever and then decide what to do? That was excellent addition to the program.
I often get questions from people
Yeah.
about diminished, maybe the smaller size of the collection at our municipal library. But I like to emphasize that our membership in the CIN network, for example, creates tremendous access.
Right.
If there is not an immediate piece available, it actually can be delivered to the
Right.
library in a very short time.
Right, and that's part of when we're working with our clients on sizing their collection to whatever physical space they do have, is that if you're more constrained in space and you're part of the system, maybe you have to take a little harder look to, 90% of the members in the system have that book. It's not circulating here in the last 2 years. Well, normally maybe with like a 4-year circulation to weed, but you know what, because it's a book a bit readily available within our system, maybe we can go to a 2-year non-circulating standard for that. I mean, that's just an example of some things you can look at when you're part of a system to, make some adjustments in how you develop your collection. Yes, sir.
Have we ever looked at book donations to the library and what the criteria is for that? What the guidelines are for donations?
In terms of,
People who want to donate books to the library,
which they do, get a lot of them.
what are the guidelines for that? I know when we moved here from Florida, I had a lot of Civil War series books. And moving costs were $1 a pound to move here. So I wanted to get rid of a lot of the heavy stuff.
Right.
So I donate a lot of our books to the local library there in Palm Harbor, Florida.
Yeah.
And they were happy to get them. So do we do that kind of thing in Liberty Lake?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Good.
We use the same collection standards as we do when we're purchasing books, and any books that are donated that we don't choose to add to the collection for whatever reason will then go to the Friends of the Library so that they can use it in their book sale, and the proceeds then come back to the library to help with programming. So,
Do we communicate that to the citizens, and how do we do that, and how can we do that?
that is we can work on communicating that more.
Yeah, we're gonna circle back to communication, 'cause I think that's a big topic to hit. One of the big trends in libraries, again, this is a trend, doesn't mean it's relevant here in Liberty Lake, but is lending things beyond the book. So the lists you see here are things that at least one, in many cases, it's much more than one library that we know of, are circulating, lending these items out from the library. And again, this comes back to that sharing, economy kind of thing I was talking about. These are things that people want or need or would like to use, but they don't need to own, they just want to borrow. Anything on this list that jumps out as like, well, that would be particularly relevant to this community?
Musical instruments.
Mm-hmm.
Art, as long as you have a longer lending period, so you keep.
Sure, right, yeah, right. And the interesting thing with art, I say this is a new trend. I say this is a new trend, but in fact, it's an old trend reborn again, because I grew up in a library that lended art, right? And, you checked out a framed print to hang on your wall at home, and you returned it a month or two later or something, and you can switch it through. It's coming back more now as kind of often a partnership with local artist organizations. So the local artists have a way to kind of get their art out into the community without necessarily having to try to sell it to everyone.
My son's doing Running Start this year, so I recently got to take a tour of the Spokane Community College Library, and they call it their Library of Things.
Yep.
And they also had in there games,
Yep.
Apples to Apples, Monopoly, whatever. And they also had kitchen accessories, like somebody probably doesn't want to spend $300 or $400 on a big mixer, but they may need one for a weekend.
Right.
And obviously that stuff takes up a lot of space, which we
Yep.
don't really have.
Right.
But what a concept, I was really impressed.
Yeah, that's the caveat to this category is these are much more typically more space intensive than books. But if there's a need for it, we want to factor that into the needs assessment and how that would impact current and future space needs.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept because it's not a new concept, as you mentioned. I recall back in the 70s when I worked downtown at a bank, is that I used to go down to the main library.
Mhm.
And I was flabbergasted there one day when I saw somebody carrying out paintings.
Yeah.
And I thought, what, are they stealing? What's going on here?
Right.
And the librarian says, oh, we checked that stuff out. I said, really?
Yeah.
And they showed me to a room where they had paintings, they had a lot of games, Monopoly games, things of the sort here. And they would check those out, and I've never forgot that, because I thought that's amazing.
Yeah.
So what we used to do is at the bank I worked at, we used to go down monthly to the library, and we rotated a lot of the art
Right.
from the library.
Yeah.
We'd be walking those 4 blocks back
Right.
with art.
Yeah, looking like a bunch of art thieves.
But yeah, I thought somebody was stealing them. But I think it's a great idea,
Yeah.
because once again, it's something else that gets the citizens who are paying for this
Yeah.
to see the value in the work they're getting for their dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, and you mentioned a couple people mentioned board games. I mean, I would actually say that's almost bordering on becoming the standard in libraries. Is board games. I mean, in Indianapolis, we have the largest board game Gen Con conference in the country, actually, it's in the world. And, I mean, it's board games are still a huge industry, and a lot of people play them. And they can be pretty expensive, right? And it's not something you need all the time. So it's a good thing, it makes a really logical thing to share.
Let's talk about sharing from a standpoint of collections. I mean, one of the things you see, I like power tools, right? So I have power tools, the neighbor has power tools. They probably have 20 chop saws in our block.
Right?
And so how do you, the library can't afford to bring all this stuff in and put it. So how do you develop a collection on a kind of this global scale?
Sure, right.
Say, hey, Steve has some chop saws to borrow or whatever. Check it from him. Or
Yeah.
send in a call for a chop saw.
I mean, as a former software guy, what you just described sounds like a great software platform idea for libraries, right? A library could have a software platform where basically residents say, hey, I have this chop saw, and I have this circuit or bandsaw, and I have these different things that I'm willing to loan out, and the library could act as kind of the barter broker, kind of digital warehouse for that, and the middleman, and get people sharing between them. Yeah, so I mean, it absolutely is something that could be done, and the library wouldn't have to have any space for that, right? I mean, there's probably a little bit of management, obviously curating the platform and doing a little bit of intermediary work, but yeah, that's a great idea.
Downtown Spokane Library, they actually had a program set up that they had a list of individuals who had power equipment in their garage, they had their own shops and stuff,
Mhm.
and they would coordinate with the library that they would give their name if somebody wanted to come in and do something.
Cool.
Because I can recall going to the library,
Yep.
and I found plans to build my son a bed with drawers on it, things of the sort here,
Mhm.
but I had no access of cutting the plywood and stuff.
Right.
So through the library, they put me in contact with an individual in South Hill that had his 2-car garage completely set up. I went up there, he helped me build this thing, and most memorable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
And that came strictly through the library.
Through the library, that's awesome. That's a great story. All right, so let's do a little pivot now to kind of the specifically services and spaces. So we're going to talk about service and space and programming across kind of a variety of different kind of age groups. So we got youth, so we're going to talk 0 to 7, then kind of the middle kids, so those kind of later elementary age years, then into the preteens and teens, and finally the adults. So as you think about the spaces and the services, the programs, even touch collections if you want to come back to that, like how do you view what the library has now, what your standard of service that you would like to see from them in those regards? You know, how do you view those services and spaces across any one of those specific age groups? Yeah.
So it's been a long time since I've looked at things for somebody other than myself, since my son's a senior, but I remember when he was in middle school, it seemed to be the biggest struggle to find things that he wanted, so that whatever age that is, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, was the bigger struggle. We weren't here when he was real little for the real small children stuff, but yeah, middle school was a particularly difficult time to find what he was looking for.
Yeah. And a lot of libraries really turn to what I would call non-reading programming to really try to engage those age groups, particularly the boys in those age groups, because they're even have a bigger struggle more often than not. So, like, you know, this is a picture of a baking program in the right corner from the library year that was for teens. So just trying to find different ways to engage that group beyond just write at them with the book, right?
I see that, I've always looked at one of a large challenge for us in the Lake is that we only have so many square feet over there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not gonna get any more square feet in that building. But we would just move ahead with that assumption.
Yep.
So to me, it's always been with library assessment, is that how do we utilize the square footage we have now versus getting too far into the weeds of creating things that we want and yet we don't have the space to do it.
Yep.
And then selling that to the public as a, this is what you really need. Oh my gosh, we don't have the space.
Yep.
So, you know, I'm in favor of all these type of programs, but it really comes down to what is best for the facility we have now.
So I think, let me take a step back of like what our intention is in this process, right? Part of what we're gonna give you is some recommendations on some things to do right now to maybe, you know, make more effective use of the space you have today, right? But, you know, we're gonna look at it across a variety of different axes of like, what space does this community really need, right? So like one of the simplest ones, we haven't really done all that analysis yet, but one of the simplest ones you can just kind of do in your head is the square foot per capita, right? So what we've kind of seen nationally as a baseline is about 1 square foot per capita is kind of the baseline. That's not like ideal, that's not like aligned to specific communities that look like this, that's just kind of like the boilerplate kind of, you know, libraries that are at 1 square foot per capita at least can adequately deliver on the service needs in states where they have levels of service defined and things. So right now you're at about 11,000 people in the community. The library is at about 8,700 square feet. So you're already, if you just look at today, based on that one kind of analysis approach, you have a shortage, right? We're going to look at it across a variety of different aspects and look at it today versus, one of the things that's interesting here is you have a very fast-growing community. You have some sense of where you're going to end up in the 18.5-ish range, right? And a general sense of when that might happen. So we can kind of project forward to what you might need. You know, obviously we're making more guesses about how library service will evolve and such, but we can give you a range of what you might need at that point too. So I think we're going to try to address that, but at the same time addressing what could you do now in the footprint that you're in to at least try to get the most out of what you have.
Maximized.
Right, very good.
Well,
Yes, sir.
Along those lines, you know, in business and industry, we talk about capacity utilization.
Yep.
And, you know, theoretically, that space, you have that space for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you utilize it 100%, that's what you would do. You'd be open 24/7 for 7 days, and anyway. So I think there are a lot of things that we can do. We're never going to have that, of course, but I think the space that we have, I think there are a lot of things that we're not doing now and utilizing the space effectively. We don't have very much meeting space in the city, but we do have a little meeting space in the library. I'm not sure what capacity that is, how much that is utilized. What brought that up was a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were out having a late breakfast, and an older gentleman came up to me and said, "Well, you look familiar to me." And I said, "Well, you know," and I told him, you know, I lived in Liberty Lake and I was on the council, and he said, that's probably where I know you from. And he was telling me that he and 4 other Vietnam veterans got together every week for breakfast at this place. It was a discussion group. He said, we just discuss all topics. Any topic we want to bring up, we just discuss. And it seems to me that kind of a discussion group or open forum for people in our community would be a good thing to have.
Yep.
We don't really have that. I mean, there are plenty of discussion groups on the media, but no face-to-face kind of open forums where people could sit down and discuss topics.
Right. Yep.
I'd like to see us do more of that in the community.
We have that conversation in a lot of communities, because I think we see, and this, the genesis for this really came from Ken's dad. So her family lives in western New York, kind of the rural areas between Rochester and Syracuse, and her dad, pretty much every day, at least 6, sometimes 7 days a week, in the morning and then later in the afternoon, goes down to the diner, the coffee shop,
Yeah.
and same thing, right? Just a group of people, there's no attendance, there's no agenda, but they just get together and talk.
Yes.
And, but a lot of communities don't have that diner, right? They don't have that good option, and, I'm sure that a lot of people in that town like her dad, he's a great guy, but I'm sure there's people in the town that don't always like him or like other people in that group and want a different place, right? So you need some options, because not everybody's, that wants to have a conversation with everybody in the community. So you need a lot of those different options. So completely agree. I think one of the challenges, a lot of times those kind of groups want to meet at times that most libraries aren't open, right?
Yes.
So it becomes a challenge. What's interesting, the first time it's come up here, but there's kind of a new radical approach to this kind of emerging. There's a company called Biblioteca, that's a library technology company that's launched a platform they've had in Europe for quite a while called Open Plus. And it actually provides a system where someone signs up and they go through a vetting usually and some kind of signed agreements and things and some training. But with their library card and a PIN number, they can access the library building outside of normal operating hours. So I think from our understanding, most of the libraries that are trying this still have staff in the building, but there's no services during those Open Plus times, right? But people could come, sit down, talk, use the internet, use the computers. They can still check something out as long as they're willing to use the self-check, right? But there aren't librarians on staff, there aren't, paraprofessionals on staff to circulate or pay fines and those kind of things. So kind of a different, approach to, like you said, trying to get closer to full utilization of the resource that you have. Anything specific on programming? I mean, this is what we've heard so far, and we're not quite halfway through our process yet with the community. But we have been hearing a lot of good things about programming related at the library. So any specific thoughts around where you see strengths in this regard, or where you think the library could do more?
I think, first of all, Gus and the crew have really done an outstanding job in programming, and leading us into the future.
Yeah.
The goal is to have more of it
Yeah.
and more hands-on type stuff, because I think that I was talking to somebody here just today, I think it was, we were talking about touch the truck.
Yeah,
And
that's kind of what we call it.
that was just like, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
Well, I think some thought is maybe how do we get that, maybe not have the touch a truck all at one time, but touch the fire station or touch the school bus barn or
Right.
something like that, just that kids can touch and feel and put themselves into the picture. But Jocelyn, you guys, outstanding.
Well, I think, oh yes, go ahead.
I hate to disagree with the mayor, but I think the library does a wonderful job with the young people. I think they do not very much for the older people, except for the people that serve on the Friends of the Library.
Yeah.
I think they participate in the library management in that degree, and I think it's a very good group, and my wife belongs to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that, as an example, Spokane Valley has their own central library.
Mm-hmm.
They also have a senior center at their city center. And there they have a satellite library. And it's all run by volunteers. There are no full-time employees in the senior center there or in their satellite library. As our community grows, and it might be more difficult for many people to get to the library, or if it's full to capacity, to get in and do what they want to do. Maybe we should consider having satellite libraries throughout the community.
Okay.
They're not very big, you know, it's just a small room. We could have one here at City Hall. Probably have a vacant office somewhere, don't we?
Well, you know, we have those little book box libraries that they have in the.
Little free libraries, the little free libraries.
Free libraries, we have those popped up all over. We have discussions with the Central Valley School District and shared library services, or trying to get to allowing our library services to start to transact, maybe over to Selkirk, maybe to New High School.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think, again, we used to have the bookmobiles. You know, they'd come around to the schools.
Yep.
From the library.
I think overall with programs, I agree with Bob in the sense of maybe the senior citizen aspect of it. But I think overall, I think we do a very good job. Not only when Pamela first started the library and built it up to the point where it allows Jocelyn to come in and lead us from that point on. The challenge comes back to is what's already been mentioned, is space and having employees to be able to do that, because my 11-year-old grandson that is involved in a lot of these things, and whenever one of these programs come up, they fill immediately.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Jocelyn has to turn away a lot of individuals.
Yeah.
You know, so that's encouraging that we have that sort of participate. A lot of people.
Right.
But the likelihood of getting more space and more staff might be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. And, you know, you can sometimes address the space issue by taking some programs off-site, right, taking them outside of the library. The challenge to that is, you know, if say it takes an hour of staff time to deliver a certain program inside the library, right? Inevitably, delivering that same program outside the library is at least 2 hours of staff time, sometimes 3, right? So just the resource demands of taking it outside the building just are you know, a multiplier factor.
Well, I think the city we're really in, I think, a pretty good position, because we're looking at Trailhead and expanding that, and I think the possibility of maybe not getting more square footage where we are, but we don't have space to take the library out from there. And I think as the city grows, we will be able to have some of that. So I'm encouraged with that.
Oh, just on the picture here with the kids with the car, I think, you know, some of the new teen and tween programs, they're a really great addition. Like I said, trying to get those age kids involved with the library. But again, you see this one, that's, I can't remember if it was at the police department or if it was over, just down in our parking lot over here, but that's something that you can, you know, you may not even need library staff, but if somebody from the outside or somebody else in the city is willing to put that on, you can take that outside the library.
Yeah. So, specifically like to address this kind of issue and everything, because, you know, we talked about earlier, right, the libraries have changed. You know, when I was growing up, many of you, we were, you know, got Butler Whisper, you got shushed, right? And we don't really live in that era now where people are shushed. And doesn't mean the libraries are always loud, but most communities are looking at their libraries as a little more dynamic kind of place. So, you know, how, you know, in this library, you know, is all mostly one big area. The littlest kids are kind of in a separate area that's a little bit segregated, but for the most part, it's kind of one big room. So, you know, any thoughts specifically around kind of quiet versus active and how those areas are zoned and kind of spaces are there adequate spaces for people that do want quiet to kind of come and work and read and things like that?
I think a mix of the areas is important. The combination of both effects.
Yep.
I've observed actually teens in small groups needing to interact in quiet and say somewhat subdued ways.
Right.
It seems the spaces that we have right now have performed well in that regard. particularly the kind of diner-like spaces, group tables that allow people to, in small ways, interact.
Yeah.
So,
And we kind of hit on this a little bit, but technology, whether it's computers, whether it's printing, 3D printing, collaborative space, so like, accessing, not just working together, at a table on physical things, but having digital support for that as they work on group projects, are big things in libraries. And, even though you have a community that, I think if I recall in the demographics, like 93% of the community is estimated to have a PC at home. And high 80% in terms of broadband penetration into the community. But there's still some people that are left behind, and some people that may not have, even if they have a computer, it might not be adequate to do all the things they need to do. So where do you see that now into the future for the library? Yes, sir.
I think that would be a very useful thing to have and expand upon. I just recently had my hard drive crash on my computer.
Mm-hmm.
I had it backed up, but reinstalling those things isn't really easy.
Right.
If
Yeah.
you've ever done that.
Yeah.
Anyway, all I can do is just go online and try to find out what you can online about them, but I'd like to see some kind of a computer group, in the library that,
Like a help desk, kind of
Yeah.
community help desk.
yes, I think so.
Can I back up for a moment?
Yeah, of course.
Back on the previous page on quiet and active areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it, a couple of years ago, when we really started getting into this, looking at down the road of getting to where we are today,
Mm-hmm.
I started taking the time to go over to Post Falls Library.
Yep.
The librarian there spent probably 7, 8 different times. I went over there and just spent time sitting there, observing, and also with Coeur d'Alene over there. And both of those, librarians said, sit in the quiet space and just observe what goes on.
Mhm.
And both of those libraries do a very good job. Like Post Falls has an area with a fireplace.
Right.
And if you sit there and spend any time in these libraries, you'll find that automatically people gravitate to that area.
Mhm.
Because they'll pick up a book and be able to sit down and read it for a period of time, and they find that they're having conversations, things of the sort.
Right.
So the quiet and active areas for me are very important.
And one of the things in particular at Post Falls that makes that successful is they have study rooms and group study rooms where people that do need to work as a group can go and not create, interference for others, right?
Yeah, I think you have photos in here. Are those photos of those glass enclosures? Was that Post Falls?
No, it's not Post, I don't have any pictures of Post Falls in here, but,
Because the librarian said that that was actually very successful when they did that.
yes.
Because it's a quiet space, but the nice thing is, it was so full of glass that it seemed to encourage individuals to utilize that.
Yes, definitely. So, again, this is another big trend in libraries. Again, something that although we've seen libraries do this without space, they've done it kind of in maximizing space they have and multi-use for space. But we kind of hit on this a couple times with the tools and things like that, is space for creation. I think the concept here is people are looking not just to their libraries as the market, the store where they go to get things, but they want the library to be a little bit of the kitchen too, where they can create and put things together. So sometimes you hear these things referred to as maker spaces, digital resource labs, and there's a whole variety of how libraries have implemented this. And in some communities we work with, it's like, yeah, that doesn't make sense here. We have other places kind of filling that outlet. So I guess we're just kind of curious, is this something that this community might need?
Whether we need it or versus we can deal with the expense of providing it. We do have, I spent a bit of time over at Gizmo in Coeur d'Alene, which is a nonprofit makerspace. They do a lot of classes for kids. I would much prefer to see an entity like that come into the community to do these higher level type projects. Maybe a small space, for people who are trying to be self-taught. But I personally think this is overkill, at least this point in time for our community, for the city to pay for. And I can hear the taxpayers now, well, we're paying this much and, for a handful of people to use it. Those are the things we always have to keep in mind,
Sure.
what the benefit is to the entire community.
Sure. I guess the question, if, obviously if there's commercial options, that would be great, but is, Liberty Lake big enough to draw? I mean, I heard in some groups today, they were talking about like, some struggles with, boutiques that come in and the community's not maybe quite yet at that critical mass to support some of that, those shops and things, and I wonder, some of that might be challenges for those kind of resources as well. We've kind of hit this a couple times. I don't know, anything else to speak to on, meetings, space, programming space, as it relates to the library, that we haven't already hit? We've kind of tangentially hit this a couple times. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm concerned about what the scope of your investigation is. I saw on your bios that you did some analysis in Upper Peninsula of Michigan,
Yeah.
and I've been there. What's the name of the city again?
Marquette, right?
No.
In UP,
The UP.
the project we did in the UP, wasn't that in Marquette?
I
Was
can't
that?
think of the name.
Yeah, the one they had the art
Yeah.
maker space in the basement. I
Yes.
can't recall the name of the library now. Sorry, I'm focusing on notes. I totally lost track. I can't remember the name, but it is Marquette.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that you did the analysis, and I think your recommendation was that, and what they finally did, was utilize an old school and remodeled it for their library.
Okay. That was in the UP.
And,
Oh, that's not that project.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
not sure what that one is. But yeah, keep going, go ahead.
anyway, so I just wonder whether those are the kind of things you're looking at, where's available space in the community? Where they can expand or move part of the operation or all the operation, or is that included in your scope of your?
Yeah, but like a site survey kind of thing wasn't in the scope. I mean, it's more about like the needs in terms of service and space needs. And when we do the retreat on October 29th, where we're gonna work with members of the community, library board, staff, maybe some council members if they're interested in, where we're kind of synthesizing all the findings and things into some like, what are the most likely directions and options that should be, obviously, ultimately, there are political questions to answer in whatever you do, right? But like, what are the most obvious kind of political options that meet at least some kind of directional needs and things? So that's really where we're focused. Now, part of that discussion, because you're gonna have a lot of people in the community that are from here and may know, well, maybe we could do that. I'm not saying that those discussions might not, enter the conversation, but it's not a formal part of our assessment of looking for spots and things like that, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Let's see. Okay, so I promised we were gonna hit this one. So community awareness. Well, the first thing I'll say is, every library we've ever worked with is struggling with this, right? And probably every town in the country is struggling with this. In this day and era where communication is fragmented, people, kind of have their own channels that they focus on and they filter other things out. There's no one newspaper a lot, or if there is a newspaper, it's less frequent and less read. So how do we communicate to the community? What do you see where the library needs to do maybe some things they're not doing, or do more of some things you think are working? We are asking we're doing I didn't mention that, we're doing an online survey component as this process as well. This is one of the specific things we do ask, is how do people want to be communicating to, right? What are the communication channels that they want the library, how does the best way for the library to reach them? So that's on a quantitative level, we are trying to get at that specific question as well.
I think just from a advertising type concept, I mean, you have to have, it's a mass deal, so it's not just a segment, it's our entire community.
Yep.
And then so you have to have something that can reach that. And And then also reach into the things that motivate them to utilize the facility.
Yep.
I think, so I mean, everybody, some people hear, somebody sees, somebody touch, that they all have different learning ways.
Mhm.
They have different ways that they communicate.
Right.
And so if you just focus on, everything is online, you're gonna reach 15-20%.
Right.
So, and like the splash, it's like, hey, we used to communicate a lot with that, but now it's limited, now it's a monthly magazine.
Right.
So, Mike?
I was just gonna say, for Liberty Lake, we have many things going for us, but we have a few things going against us. One, we don't have a newspaper, we don't have a radio, we don't have TV. We have websites, things that sort there, that we can encourage individuals, but to encourage them, we have to use our websites to encourage them, because we're not really in a position to advertise in the splash to say, do this, do this, do that. I think a lot of it comes down to, or hopefully it will come down to, that the average citizen, the age of them, and the amount of children we have here, that I think those individuals there are the ones who will talk up the library what it is. On, my kid does this and that, and it generates more interest in there, and then try to back it up through our city website on it, because in all honesty, I've heard the council, we've discussed many times, how do we get individuals to be more aware? And if they don't have an interest, we're not gonna get them to be aware.
Yeah.
Okay? They have to have some interest to be involved. And we can't get to everybody.
Right.
Some will, some won't. So what?
Yeah.
I don't think we have to continually try to spin our wheels to get to those who don't have an interest right now.
Right.
Maybe they will later on.
Well, one of the things I think that's interesting is that it is the advantage of the modern era, because you have a kind of geo-targeted zone of users, is that digital advertising, if you're looking at a very tight geo-targeted zone, can be pretty affordable. The problem is, it's kind of a very specialty thing that somebody has to get up to speed on how to do it. There's a lot of kind of intricacies in it and things. But I think that's a place maybe where libraries could develop on staff, find somebody that's interested in it, develop, some skill set. What's clear already is the library is doing pretty well on Facebook with people in the community that use Facebook. And so there's ways you can further leverage that through kind of Facebook ads and things like that. But I think even beyond Facebook, and you're seeing so many more other kind of organizations that have geo-targeting kind of customer bases utilizing digital ads, that I think that may be a place where you can, again, you're still focused on the audience of people that are using digital platforms and using digital devices, so it's still not going to get to everyone. But I think you can, reach a little broader mind share beyond just the people, the way you're generally approaching Facebook today, you're getting the people that are already paying attention, like you say, right? Through ad use that you can get to some of the people on Facebook that maybe aren't paying as much attention, but with some, kind of effective kind of campaigns, you can kind of maybe reach at least their mind share a little bit. You're probably not going to change their mind about using the library, but maybe raise their awareness of, wow, I didn't realize the library was doing that for this community. I'm really glad they're doing that.
I think that's a strong benefit if they're aware of it.
Right.
When they do have a need for it, they'll go, I can probably get that from the library.
Right.
So there is an intrinsic value,
Yep.
that is there. I think for the most part, I've noticed over a period of time that I think the most active volunteers we have of any of our organizations, of any of our committees and stuff, is really associated with the library.
Yeah.
With our trustees, with our friends of the library, there's that sort there that generates a lot of stuff on email, text, things of the sort here.
Yeah.
And if you look at something like that, you just get a lot of responses from individuals. What we also get is that responses from individuals that say, well, I'm paying for the library, and people outside the area get those benefits I'm paying for. This should be for strictly the citizens, or give priority to citizens, especially for the groups. That's something that has come up several times. Jocelyn, I'm sure you would agree with that. Somebody would look, because I've seen that on email, is that if we only have room for 20 kids in a program, it really should be given to the citizens, and then if there's extra spaces, somebody outside the area. But then how do you monitor something like that? It's pro and con.
I think the city's website remains a definitive source for information about the library. I think that people would look to it also in the sense of, if I really wanted to know, it should be the place that I'd be able to discover in terms of actions, programs, and references of information.
Right.
I think the city also has electronically changeable signs, the one we use at the corner, for example.
Right.
That to me is provided,
Tonight's meeting was on it.
there you go.
Yeah.
That to me is providing great visibility to people about goings on. So that's another resource to communicate broadly with people.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important? That needs to be either something that we need to look at as a part of the analysis, or questions? You know, we still have several sessions left. In particular, Thursday night, is it 6, Kim? O'clock?
Yeah,
It's on that green
that
card
is
there.
right, isn't
Thursday
it?
at
That's
6, yeah.
what-
Thursday at 6 is another large, hopefully large, public open forum. And we definitely are hoping to get a good crowd for that. The questions that you would want us to ask, yeah, sir.
Yes, have you looked at the original estimate when that library was built?
Not yet, we will as a part of the process, yes.
And the presentation that was made on that to AWC in whatever year that was. Anyway, it's like for you to look at that, look at their analysis and see what faults there were, because at that time, they estimated that the library should be able to serve a community of 20,000 people.
At the current size?
Yes.
Interesting.
Unless you look at the analysis and see what's faulty about it.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've kind of just been quiet and listening because I wanted to learn some things, and I have, so thank you. Let me just, from a perspective of just listening, we've talked about the library becoming or being utilized as, and this is a long list.
Sure.
Okay, so social club, senior center, child and adult learning center, meeting spaces, general traditional library, reading clubs, chess clubs, arts and crafts, fireside chat, anyway, it just goes on and on and
Sure.
on.
Right.
Okay? What I haven't heard, and I don't know how important it is, but what I haven't heard is, hey, our analysis is not going to be about what we would like to be, but what are we doing now that's effective, and how can we improve that? Okay? So in those regards, when we talk, you said your focus is on the needs of the library.
Yep.
Yet we spent an hour talking about wants.
Well, I think what we're saying is the community needs, like, just to clarify what we're saying, what does the community want and need from their
Okay.
library?
How do you determine that? We have 11,000, or how many people we have, okay? How do you determine that you're getting a cross-section, okay? How many percentage points, how many requests for an item does it take before you say, oh, we need to add this book, or we need to add this relevant program that a lot of people would like? In a community this size or any size, how do you determine, other than by a count of requests, has our library been keeping track of requests that we don't provide? Other than saying, no, we don't provide that, have we been tracking how many people have requested a particular item? And finally, do we want to become something for everybody? Okay?
Sure.
Or do we want to focus on what we do well? In my mind, I'm thinking child, okay? Seems to be our biggest winners, okay? One of our best producers. Do we want to be all these other things? Or does Liberty Lake want to go where 30% of, as you point out, 30% of our community is, and provide the service to that target area? I'd like to hear something that comes from your survey that indicates, yes, we've looked at this, we've considered it, and this is what we think. Can you explain to me how that might be incorporated into your focus?
Well, I think, so we're looking, and ultimately, the decisions aren't ours, right? We're not coming at this, our approach in this process isn't, we're gonna decide for you, right? Our role in this process is to provide facilitation, right? Analysis, right? And that strategic retreat on the 29th is really, that is where the recommendations are gonna come from. And those recommendations and kind of directions aren't like from our decision. We don't have, with the processes we go to get that, aren't processes we have to vote in, okay? The way we approach that, the people in the room, the people that are involved in that retreat, the exercises, like there's not vote exercises and group work to kind of force sort, this is more important than this and things like that. Those are where the kind of the guidance and the recommendations will come out of this process. And all the people in that will be people that are, people that live in the community, work in the community, are part of the leadership of the community.
It will also be the people who are intensely interested
Sure.
in the library.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so I still would like to know how that is cross-referenced against the community's
Okay.
desire. All right?
Right.
I understand that the people who want the library to do this, that, and the other, okay,
Right.
they want a commercial kitchen, they want whatever.
Right.
Well, if they happen to have two people in the meeting room that like that idea, does that get put down as a need for the city?
Well, it doesn't automatically just do that. I would expect, the charge to the people in the room is you're trying to, come up with what the community wants, not just what you personally want, right? What is based on the evidence that's in the analysis, based on what we learned in the survey, what we heard and what we end up hearing in the community sessions, right?
That kind of communication is important.
Right, but based on those
Not just
things.
what you would like for yourself, but for the community. I think
Absolutely.
that's important.
Absolutely, and I think, this is a personal opinion, but governments get run by the people that show up, right? And so, and there's no way in any process that you can get, even with, we've learned, and if we haven't learned anything in the last 10 years, it's learned that even polling isn't always exactly accurate at measuring the sentiment of the American population, right? So, we didn't price this package at a level of giving you like a super scientific Gallup level, 3% error, perfect cross-section of the community kind of survey, right? But we're trying to get, we're doing everything we can to get a broad survey. So far, in what the results we have so far, about 16% of the people that are taking the survey are what we call non-users, right? They self-describe as either never using the library or hardly ever using the library, right? So we're working hard to try and get participation from your community of the people that aren't just the library champions, right? We want to hear, and it's important to hear, what, the people that don't necessarily, again, keep in mind, just because they don't use the library doesn't mean they don't necessarily support the need for it within the community. We see that, consistently. But yeah, and then ultimately, whatever those recommendations are, as I said, again, choices in the end are political choices. You've obviously been through this a couple times in different iterations and different kind of, packages of things, and so, there's a lot to weigh in terms of how you would maybe go forward with any recommendations that come out of this process. So I don't know if that completely answers your question.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I just wanted to tell you what I was hearing.
Sure, right.
Okay, when we talk about
Yeah.
these things, and that's a big list to fulfill.
Right.
For any city, not just Liberty
Right,
Lake.
and I want to stress that just because we talked about it doesn't mean that we're saying that this is what your library has to have, right?
Right.
We're talking about it so that we can find out, is this something that resonates? Is this something that people in the community think is important? And, and ultimately, at the end, you're going to have to figure out, like, what is the right service level of the library, right? And that service level relates to not just choices of like how we're going to serve, but how many staff and how much space, and those things all work together in the end to define the service level.
Well, I appreciate that, and like you've said, I've talked about just quickly was, you have the needs and you have the wants.
Right.
The other thing that we have to guard against, because we're using public money.
Yeah.
And I'm please do not say I'm saying the Liberty Lake Library is doing this, because I'm not. I'm just saying government
Yeah, sure.
has the tendency to use surveys, to use focus groups, et cetera, to build their self-relevancy,
Mhm.
okay? To boast of that, oh, we need a library because we have somebody out there who said we need this, that, and the other,
Mhm.
okay? And so we can get bigger, better, and stronger if we run over and say, okay, now we need this, this, and this. Right? And again, that costs money.
Sure.
So I agree with you, I appreciate it, I'm looking forward to your return, and Jocelyn, I want the best for your library. I'm very pleased with what's going on with the children. You know, I mean, that is one consistent echo. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for this program, this program, this one, this one, okay? And I just really want us to know that we're doing something very good. And let's don't lose sight of that and how we can improve that even more, because I don't see us changing from a family city, not for a long time. Okay. So we've got some needs out there and you're meeting them, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed.
So I was reflecting on the objective regarding assessment and my personal perspectives on library, where I'd originally myself considered library to be, I'll say, a center for knowledge and understanding. I reflected on that gently as a physical place to have as a recognition of knowledge and understanding. It's complemented greatly with your recognition of, I'd say, shared resources. That actually really profoundly helps me understand. One thing I've found our library to not be able to complement knowledge and understanding is, I'll say, a gallery-like exhibition space, not just of collections owned by the library, but collections which may be available for temporary exhibition. Like that we have, for example, in the community, a historical society that has, I think, in one of the tiny little windows of exhibition space, used the elementary school's foyer to try and present or to share what are artifacts, pieces, photographs that reflect that part of our community. So I would observe maybe that the library, I think, should play an important role in that. The ability to provide space for exhibition, I'll call it, either from locally sourced or from, I'd say, externally presented materials.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dan's comment just reminded me, the name of the place is Charlevoix, Michigan.
Oh, Charlevoix, yeah, sorry.
Charlevoix.
Not quite UP. Not quite the UP. It's on,
It's the lower.
yeah, it's still on the mid.
It's a lower, yeah.
And they are in an
And
old
they are in an old
school
school,
building.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
anyway, it's a very, very nice community,
It is, yes.
and they have a summer-long art show up there,
Yeah.
and we spent a week on a boat sitting
Yep.
on the main street, beautiful place.
And I think I would say to the council member too is that you absolutely have to weigh the needs, right, of the community. But I do wonder, isn't there also a response at least to contemplate the wants of the community? You know, not, does it have to reach 90% of the community of wanting something for it to be something that can be successful and might be an important part of the library? And I would say Charlevoix is a kind of interesting example because they do quite a few things that I would tell you the community doesn't need, but man, does that community value, right? And an interesting impact, I know you guys are growing fast, so maybe this isn't a big an issue for you, but an interesting in their process that has always stuck with me is we had several realtors that attended our community sessions there, and every single one of them told, I've never heard this before, the libraries, when I have somebody that comes in from out of town looking to maybe buy in Charlevoix, the first place I take every single one of them is the library. And they said, and how many people that end up buying in Charlevoix tell them that one of the big factors for their decision was how amazing their library is. So, not saying that's a reason to do anything, I just, as you think about the impact and, why are people choosing to live and be a part of Liberty Lake, in some communities, that library is a central, element of the why. Maybe they don't need it, but man, do they love it and value what it brings to their community, so.
One of the questions I had in your report or at the end is, the context of the citizens, because sometimes they don't know all the
Right.
things that are out there.
Right.
What do you think the library needs?
Right.
You know, there's no.
Right, which is why we do the process we do tonight, to give them some context.
But I mean, you
and
guys aren't at the library, but I'm looking at from the outside, what are the
Yes.
standards?
Sure.
And Bob's question is, you know, is what is your level of service standard?
Mhm.
You know, to Charlottesville,
Mhm.
why is that guy taken there?
Right.
You know?
Right.
I mean, so those are the things I want to make sure that is kind of incorporated, at least from my perspective,
Yeah, okay.
in the survey to make sure people have, trying to give them a level playing field to start to
Right.
equate from.
Right, and it is why, and particularly to that issue, is why we do both the survey component and the community sessions. Because even though we try to add some context in the questions we ask in the survey, there's no way to give them that full context that we can in this kind of setting, right? So that's why we have this, because we can provide all the context, we can show trends, and so we can specifically say, is this trend, or is this thing that libraries do, is it relevant here? Right, because it's not always relevant. I mean, we've heard some things here that may not be high on the importance scale, that are, you know, maybe a little bit on the want, but low on the need, you know, kind of perspective. That's why we do, and why we emphasize these community sessions as a part of our process. It's like really one of the few things, we're very tailored to our clients, but one of the things we almost always really strongly try to insist on is having this public discussion component, because without that context and around the conversation, it's somewhat, you know, opinions are not necessarily ill-informed, but potentially less informed than they might be.
I know in Selkirk, our newest middle school, their library is like the picturesque, I don't know what to,
It's
Which-
beautiful.
it's absolutely beautiful. and
Yep.
It's just surrounded by windows, so you can go out and look at the mountains. It's probably the most valuable piece of real estate now in our city.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's to the
And
context.
we don't own it. There's no tax revenue from it. I just want to throw that out.
A coffee stand there, you know.
I hate to get down to the bottom line, but
Any other, I'm done, if there's not any other comments or questions from the council. Thank you.
We're good?
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate your time very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, well, one last thing I'll say, we're taking that survey. The survey is for everyone in the community, and we encourage you all to take it as well. And to ask people in your community, talk to your friends, put it out on your own social media. So it's on the library's website, it's on the Facebook page. Yep, and the library's Facebook page. Get that information out there to the people you know in your community and your constituents, because the more people that take that survey, I think the better we can feel about what information we do get from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay.
Were there any comments or anything?
We're gonna go for comments and.
Yeah, if you want to take citizens'
I would
comments here,
like
then we
to
have
take citizen
executive
comments,
session.
you've had an opportunity to hear discussion.
I have a citizen comment, don't stand up, or don't just talk. In listening to the idea of needs and wants and how many people use what, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, you know, our trails are a huge selling feature for people buying here. They love the idea of a trail, that they can walk wherever they want to go, they can bike, the kids can be on it, strollers can be pushed. But I would guess a very small percentage of people use it. I mean, I use trails, I'd say 6 days out of 7. And I've really seen the same few people. And I don't always use them at the same time. So not a huge majority of people of our city use those trails, but everybody talks about our trails, whether they've ever walked a mile on them, ridden a bike on them, or pushed a stroller. Those trails are a selling feature. People in the valley, people on the South Hill, people on the north side, when they ask where I live, it's odd. They'll say, wow, you guys have trails going all over. And it's true. So is that a want, or was that a need when we put them in? But, because only a very few people use them, but love them.
Any other comments? Oh,
Thank you.
thank you for your presentation. I learned some things, and that's why I came. I wanted to know some more about what you're doing. I have a question, though. I'm kind of curious if you've been able to gather information about percentages of age groups that use the library, and how often those percentages use the library. Do you have any information on that? Like under 10, teens, preteens, adults, that kind of thing. Do you have any of that information?
So we haven't collected it yet. The problem is it's kind of hard in the system that the library uses sometimes to kind of glean that information. Jocelyn, can you speak? I mean, Koha in particular, I know, has some very...
Koha has some very good features, and there are some where it's a little less good. This is one of those areas.
Oh. Okay, so we don't have really solid data about
We could maybe
what percentage of
pull-
groups are using it and how they're using it.
We could maybe pull data and figure out how many people have cards in certain age groups. That wouldn't speak to at all in terms of
Who's
people
using
going
it?
to the programs, people coming in who don't have a card but sit and utilize the space. But we could get sort of a baseline based on library cards.
I see that as kind of a valuable statistic to have in order to determine how you want to grow the library, or how you want to change the library, or add to or detract from. If there's any way to get that kind of information, it would be great.
Yep.
I wanted to comment on a couple things that I like about the library. First of all, I'm a retired educator. Libraries are pretty important in my book, in any community. And any community worth their salt has a great library, a good library. And that's one of the things that I noticed when we first moved into this library. We're one of those people that didn't grow up here, we moved into it. But that was one of the things that we noticed right away, that this place had a really good library. We walked into it, it's inviting. It's lacking in space, I will say that. There's no study carousel areas for kids to go into, to have study sessions, or to remove them from the rest of the library. Those things are things that are needed, in my opinion. But inviting, has a children's area, has a general area, has a meeting space for, a small meeting space to have different things. I think they work well with the Friends of the Library to provide other programs for people in our community, social things like tickets to the symphony, or tickets to Mobius. Those kinds of things, I think, are all great additions for our community and the people in our community. So you made one comment that stuck in my mind, and that was a comment about the square footage for population. 1 square foot for each member of the community.
Right.
And we're already behind 3,000 square feet.
Based on that type of
On that
type
alone,
of
we're
assessment.
behind.
Yeah.
But what I'm alluding to is that we're going to continue to grow. And as we continue to grow, we're going to outgrow this library. Because from the reports that I've seen, our library has a lot of usage in a lot of different ways. And so I'll leave that with that. I appreciate you listening to my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. DG, Kurt, you guys have to arm wrestle or something.
I do appreciate what you've said this evening, because it makes a difference. And in doing so, and adding some features that maybe wants, we can add revenue components to those features where we are generating funds, because ultimately we have to, in Liberty Lake, find ways to start generating more revenue. It's going to be a very important factor. If a downturn happens, people will go to this library that's built out in such a way. It's a creative, innovative way to change the landscape, and perhaps it will bring in a few people. Those people will come in and they'll spend money at that library that is more diverse than it currently is. I would also like to suggest that when we're looking at the space of the library, that we look at the airspace that it provides. We've got a ton of airspace where we can build up on that library where it can and maybe will accommodate our needs, maybe adding 2 separate levels. So we do have the propensity to grow smartly, and with doing so, we bring in revenue, and so we add more. This is a bedroom community, but they're not all just thinking bedroom, they're thinking creative, let's do something. Especially in a downturn, people go to the library. People go to those areas where there's some sort of recreation. So, that's just my 2 cents.
Did you have a comment? You sure? Any other comments? Once, twice? Hour and a half, not bad. We're gonna take
1 hour executive meeting for us.
a 1 hour executive session probably, and we'll go into that here right away. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to the audience, encourage anyone, Thursday at 6. You get to do all the talking. Tonight the council got to do most of the talking, so come again and we can discuss more about your thoughts and get more input from us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that you thought of the correct library.
Yes, no, I'm not. And you said Upper Peninsula, so I just kept getting stuck on that. When you said school, I should have thought of Charlotte. It's a fact, I mean, really great library. I would just encourage you. Yeah. Yep. Nice. Yep. I just did a similar project here with Thompson, which is right in that. Yeah, I thought we just this summer did that for them too. It's a really great library too as well. Yep. Yep. Yeah, it sounds like it is beautiful. Right. That's right. It is. Thank you. Yep, thank you.
We're all gonna go home and look at Charbonneau. Is it Charbonneau?
Charlevoix. Yeah. Like Charles and B-O-I-S. It's an amazing little town. It has these little weird mushroom houses. They look like fairy tale, little houses.
That's what they're known for.
See, that's the thing, you know. You guys, crowds. Hotel.
Sure, great.
Ready to go. Check out the hotel.
Yeah, you know, as soon as I saw that.
Go down and check out the health club. They walk through the health club, one way to the bar. Right? You have to have that health club there.
So that you can say that you're gonna.
I was there, I saw it, you know, this one's going good, let's go.
Yep.
But I tried last night, there was the
Refrigerator in your room.
which was not 0, so that's good. And it still lasted until just about 8 o'clock.
Anyway, great.
And it started at 6:30.
Okay.
So you
Yeah.
can show up.
That's fine. You can come in later.
Yes.
Oh, you got it. You can't step over it.
Then you take yourself 15 minutes. Come on
That was interesting.
I like your thank you.
That's
You were both the,
it's actually start with 11 questions. I'm trying to 11-ish.
I think that's the year is going to grow without any marketing. It's the Pacific Northwest. It's not.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you were out here for limited government and here.
Usually I have trouble.
Because we've been in the community.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad.
It was a community center, and obviously the voters said no on it. So where was? So you were pushing. So it wasn't a development or whatever. It's like, okay, this is smart. This is what the community needs.
They're hung up on this.
Yeah.
In 2005, the council basically got the second iteration of the council, right? So we started in 2001. I was the first member, so for the first 7 years. So 2005-06, we started looking at, we decided we want to have our own library in 2001. In 2006, we're saying, hey, 2005, we're saying we need to have a library place. We were renting space. We were always renting space. So then we bought 6.5 acres over here where Town Square Park is.
Okay.
Then we went through this, here's all the pictures of Town Square Park and the library,
Things we can do.
all the stuff that we can do there. So that's where it was. And then 2007, Wendy came in. I left, I got defeated by 63 votes. So I left and Wendy came in and so their plan B, they ran the bond. They lost the bond the first time. And so their plan B was to go build this library. We bought this building, we could buy it for $2 million, we put $1 million in it, we're still worth $3 million. We bought the building and put our library in.
That's where, okay.
And that's where it is, right?
Okay.
And then, so then I got them to build Town Square Park. Took 2 years to get that, the community saying we want to go, where all the farmers market and just, and that gives a flavor, says, hey, now we can start to do the next thing. So the next iteration of the Town Square was, we did a survey, we had all this input, we put in a pool, we lost by 103 votes. We needed 60%, we lost by 103 votes to get 60% of the people voting for it. So then it's like, okay, what did we do wrong or whatever? So I tried to get these guys to go through the mishmash of saying, why did the people vote for it, why did they vote against it? Just get more survey, right? Well, they didn't want to do that. But anyway, we still moved forward and tried to do the, build on that and say, well, maybe it was the pool that people didn't like, and maybe it was the $12 million
Well,
Well, I take
based on
responsibility.
community turnout though, I would say people aren't engaged, they're not invested in it. I was at their meeting yesterday, I'm here tonight, and like, where's the other 10,000 people? So, I don't know if that's a good or a bad sign, but the community piece, I'm not holding you up for anything.
Well, that's
Is like, DG and I spoke briefly, my wife's actually helping her with her campaign, but is going up in the existing space. But you take away from, if you take out some of the other amenities, maybe that plan, I thought it was good, I'm pretty sure I voted for it, because it wasn't much of a tax thing for me as it was, I would be a community member. But I'm wondering if this is not a detractor of a planned community.
not having one.
Having one, but asking the taxpayers to pay for it. So if there's funding coming from other sources, like DG's idea, or the library goes after bonds, or, you know what I mean, or not bonds, but just outside
Grants and
investing,
other
because
stuff.
the taxpayer's saying no, when I have non-taxpayers using the facilities.
Well, you could,
So, I'm just being devil's advocate.
to answer that question, number one is you can sell a membership like the Hell Club for $100 a year. Number two is a $12 million bond, right, over 30 years is $100 in 2017 money. It's $80 in 2019 money, and it's $50 in 2000. And you're continually, the valuation goes up, the cost of your person. And if you're not willing to put in $3,000 over a 30-year period of time, max, 30,000 was the max for over a 30-year period of time, apparently you really don't want it, because when you're only paying for it when you're here, because you moved in your house.
Right, absolutely, so.
You were here 40 years and you said, my house, I'm going.
Maybe that was the dynamic that was, that 103 was, they were people that weren't planning to stay or whatever, but like what some of these folks had said tonight, the trending for the community's trending younger, not older.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's need for it.
At some point, there's need, I think there's
the
probably
point
need.
is, even like the guy who runs against me, he didn't even vote in the community center election the last time. He said, I have reservations. Well, you voted to put it on the ballot.
Yeah.
So if you voted in this room and put it on the ballot, which costs us a ton of money, it costs us about $13,000 to $15,000 to run an election, you voted to put that on the ballot, right? And then you didn't bother to vote in it. that's not leadership. I'm just telling you, I'm not in the military.
No, that's okay. No, I'm trying to understand it from the tax bank piece and how, if it's repackaged, I don't know, how much did you guys spend on marketing for that community?
We spent $100,000 just to get all the stuff put together,
Ouch.
you know? I mean,
Yeah,
just to do the assessment or whatever that is. I mean, it was just like these guys.
I think it would get past the taxpayers if it was on the existing site going up and the amenities are taken out of it and you try to add the meeting spaces, but
The issue is, it'll cost you
Cost.
more.
cost,
That building isn't worth more than what it was when we
Yeah.
bought it.
cost,
Right.
sure.
And I'm
Always
saying, I
comes
already
down
own the
to that.
land. You build something there, we can go get a state grant, that would be a part of the business, you know, if we could. You know, that's one of the things held against us is quite frankly, we don't have an income level that qualifies you, oh, hey, you need to give us some money because we all make $70,000 to $80,000 a year,
Mm,
and everybody in Spokane makes 20. I mean, you know, it's like, well, we should be giving our money to Spokane or Othello or.
yeah. So real quick, is your idea to put this back on, you know, make it, you know, put it back out there and,
No, it's not right now.
yeah,
You know, my goal right now is to continue to make sure that we take care of our transportation issues. That's my number one priority. Number two priority is just like these guys who are sitting there saying, why do they want to go to Charlevoix?
Charlevoix.
You know, well, because of the
That's-
amenity, right?
Yeah.
And to what Charmaine, that's my wife, you know, so,
Is she the one with the dog?
yeah, so that's my wife and that's Rico.
Yeah.
And to her point is that, hey, we moved here because of trails. I went around the council
Yeah.
table, I said, why did you move here? We moved here because of trails. Why are you
Because of the
fighting
area, yeah.
about putting in a trail over there by the high school,
Yeah,
the middle school?
yeah, yeah.
That's because that's what you moved here for.
And the younger people are not here to present themselves for their kids, so
They're
your hands
everybody's
are kind of
busy.
tied, yeah, everybody's
You know.
tied and stuff.
They're like, here's the first book. You heard about Post Falls Library a little bit tonight.
Yeah.
Here's the
That's nice.
first book that our library got. The Friends of the Library. Talk about the Friends of the Library. Well, guess what? The Friends of the Library was started by a guy. Well, I said, I need people to support us having a library.
Mhm.
So I called my friend up and said, you get 40 people down to City Hall and tell me that, or at the meeting in 2001, that we need a library so we can get away from the county library. Otherwise, we just sign up with those guys. You never have to worry about library more. You're done. Because they'll take care of it over in the valley, and you get whatever they want to crumb they want with you.
Right, absolutely.
And so, the book that we got was, if you don't have time, the first book that our library got was, if you don't have time to do it right, when do you have time to do it over?
Speaks volumes.
It speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Mr.
pleasure
Mayor,
meeting
yeah,
you.
pleasure
You
meeting
know,
you.
tell your
Yeah.
wife, what's her?
Betsy.
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 Ah, see, I knew that.
Yeah.
I should have walked away and said, 2 times. And what's your name?
Tony.